My first summer out of high school, I helped a church plant that was near my hometown. We did a lot of things that summer, but one of the things we did was try to reach the families in that community. So we did camps and activities for kids. And after a whole summer of doing that, we wanted to go out with a bang with one last hurrah. And so we did this big kids activity. The kids loved it. At the end of it all, we were exhausted. We're packing everything up. We're all gonna pack up and go back home, start school in the fall and all of that. And so we're saying our goodbyes, and I get into my task-driven mode of cleaning up and getting ready to be done. And in my mind, I'm finished with the activity, I've moved on to the next thing. And while I'm doing that, I feel a little tug on my shirt. There were these three little girls that were at the outreach event that we had done, and they were asking me, Mr. Mike, can we have a piggyback ride? And I'm tired. This is the end of this whole thing that we've done, and the last thing I want to do is give these little girls a piggyback ride. But I'm like, all right, this one last time. And so I get them all arranged in this field. I'm like, I'm going to take you first, and then I'll drop you off over there. That's where you're going to be waiting. And we get all situated, and I start running with that first little girl on my back. And I've never really had great cardio. And so by the time I drop her off and get the second one, I'm already starting to feel it. My legs are sore, they're burning, my heart's pumping, sweating. By the time that third little girl jumps on my back and I bring her to the end, I'm just dying. And so I drop her off, they run off squealing and laughing, and I'm just laying in the grass. I'm thinking, man, I need my heart to stop pumping. I can't catch my breath. And while I'm laying there, I look off to the side, and it's like God just draws my attention to this little girl who's watching from the sidelines. Her name was Martha. She was a shy little girl that had been at several of the events that we had done, and I know she's never going to come up to me and ask for a piggyback ride, but I can see it in her eyes that she would love to have one. And so I pick myself up, walk over to her. Hey, Martha, do you want a piggyback ride too? Her eyes just light up. Yeah, I would love one. All right, Martha, well, this is going to be the craziest piggyback ride you've ever experienced. So she jumps on my back, and I'm running all over this field with her. We're like running up on the playground, and it's just the best time. She's laughing and having the best time, and my heart's pumping. And when I finally get to the end, I drop her off, and I just collapse. I'm exhausted. My legs aren't working anymore. And while I'm laying there thinking this might be the end for me, go out with a bang, I see her parents show up, and she goes running to her parents, jumps into her father's arms, and I can just hear her excitedly tell him, "Did you see me, Dad? Did you see I had the best piggyback ride? This whole event has been so fun. I love this. This is so much fun." And I'm watching this take place, and it just brings a little smile to my face. Like, oh, that's great. How good for her. Well, get back to my task. I pack up my stuff, and I go home, and I start school in the fall. And it's a few weeks later, I actually get a letter in the mail from one of the staff of that church plant. And it said a bunch of things about thanking us for being there, but at the very end of the letter, it just said, and by the way, I don't know if you remember that little girl, Martha, but she has brought her parents to church every week since that event that you guys did at the end of the summer. And I realized God was at work in this little girl's life, and I could have completely missed it if I was just focused on my own task. If I just was focused on what was right in front of me, I could have missed what God was doing. But when He alerted me to His activity, it came to a point where I had to decide, am I going to adjust from my agenda onto God's agenda? Because if we're going to join God in His activity, it's going to require adjustments. Why? Well, in Isaiah chapter 55, God says that His ways and His thoughts are higher than our ways and our thoughts. What does that mean? It means that we're not naturally going to do God's will, because God's will is beyond what we would normally think and do. And so if we're going to know and do God's will, He's going to have to show us what it is. All throughout the Bible, you see God inviting people to move from their plans and their agenda onto His. Abraham is called to leave his homeland. Moses is called out of the desert to go back to Egypt. Gideon is called to lead an army. Joshua is called to lead an army around a city. Peter and Andrew are called to leave their fishing boats and follow Jesus. The rich young ruler is called to sell his possessions and give to the poor and follow Jesus. Matthew is called to leave his tax booth and follow Jesus. In all of these circumstances, people are called to do something they probably would have never otherwise done. And if we refuse to make adjustments in our lives, we will never be ready to join God in his activity. Remember a church planter friend of mine, early on in his church plant, had done some camps for kids in the city, just some small camps, but they had gone real well. And he was following up with some of the campers by bringing them Bibles to their homes. And while he was doing that, he was praying. He was saying, God, what's the next opportunity that you have for us? Where are you at work in the city so that we can join you? Well, that same day, he gets a call from a resort hotel in the city, and they say, hey, the teacher's strike is about to happen. Kids across the city are not going to have anything to do. Would your church partner with us to do a series of camps for 4 weeks? And could you do that with us? We've seen that you've done some camps recently. Would you partner with us to do this for the city? He says, well, when do you want to start? They say in 6 days. So he says, give me a day to pray about it. And he prays and he decides that God is calling us into this opportunity. So he tells them, we'll do it. We'll do 5 camps. And then the resort said that they would do another 2 camps. So now he's got 5 days to try and find volunteers for these camps. Normally he would have 6 to 12 months. This is a church plant in Canada. He emails everybody he knows in Canada and in the United States for help. And guess what happens? People in the church take weeks off of work in order to help. The church is only about 20 people at this time, but they are all in. People in the States start buying plane tickets and flying up to help for weeks. And the reason they could is because they had an updated passport, they had money set aside for missions, and they had time off work banked so that they could join God when they saw the opportunity. Pastors of these churches had encouraged their people to be ready to make the adjustment when the time came. And so for the next 4 weeks, they lead these 6 camps and hundreds of kids from the cities come. Every camp is full. They do this incredible job. It actually lined up right when they were going to launch their weekly services. And so when they start launching their weekly worship gatherings, all these people from those camps become the core of their brand new church plant. And they've done camps for the city every year since then. You know, when we see an opportunity to join God in his work, we have to be ready to make the adjustment into his activity. And if we don't, it might just mean that we miss the activity of God that he is inviting us into. In Matthew 16:24, Jesus said, if anyone would follow after me, he must deny himself, pick up his cross, and follow me. This settles the issue of lordship right at the beginning. So we're no longer the leader of our own lives, but we watch to see where Jesus would lead us, and that's where we go. And so we constantly adjust our lives in the direction of where he leads us. In order to move forward, you're going to have to leave something behind. In order to follow Jesus, you're going to have to adjust your life to follow where he leads you. And so settle the issue of lordship in your heart today, so that you'll be ready and prepared to make any adjustments necessary to follow where he leads.
Making adjustments to God is oftentimes one of the more difficult of the 7 realities. When we think about God pursuing us with a love relationship or God inviting us to join him, that can sound pretty exciting. Like, sure, God, I'll go with you. But then God says, wait, first you have to make an adjustment. And the adjustments become the part that is difficult for us. If it was just a matter of, I'll just follow Jesus just the way I am, and I'll follow him, but stay right where I am and do the same things I've always done the way I like to do them, then following Jesus wouldn't be that difficult. But those adjustments are really where it separates those who are ready to go with God and those who aren't.
Yeah, and they're hard because we like to be in control of our lives. We like to make decisions for ourselves. And And really, when it comes down to it, none of us really like change, especially if that change leads us into places that are uncomfortable. As often, it will be uncomfortable when God calls us into His activity. And so those adjustments can be difficult because it shakes things up in our lives when maybe we want to stay comfortable. What it can also mean is that God needs to make some adjustments in us first, maybe adjustments in our character before we can make adjustments to follow what He's leading us to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we just presume upon God. We'll say, God, I'll follow you, but I want to live within the same county as my parents. Or I'll minister to this kind of people, but I don't really care for that kind of people. Or as long as you let me minister in my strengths, that's great, but don't ever ask me to do anything in my weaknesses. And there's so many different kinds of adjustments at times that God will ask. And I remember when I was a pastor, I came to a church and I was doing the very best that I could. I was giving the people my very best, but God, at a certain point, convinced me that my people didn't need my best, they needed His best. And for that, I needed to adjust my life to God and His activity. And I remember one day just working as hard as I could and just not seeing the results that I really wanted to see in my church. And I got kind of frustrated. And I remember going into my office and praying to God and saying, God, why are you not blessing the work I'm doing? I'm doing this for you. I'm doing it for your church. And the problem with asking God a question is that you have to be ready for His response. And what God said to me is, I'm giving you all the blessing that your character can handle. And I'll tell you, that was a devastating moment for me because I was still a young man, even younger than you are now. And I realized I would have a very long, fruitless ministry unless I was willing to make some adjustments. And so I remember just bowing my head and saying, then God, whatever you have to change in me, I don't want to spend the rest of my life struggling and frustrated and experiencing lack of success and blessing just because I wasn't willing to change. As painful as it might be, change whatever you have to. So I'm the kind of person that you can use in a mighty way. And I'll tell you, the next year was, without a doubt, up to that point, the hardest year of ministry in my life. I had people criticize me nonstop. I was blamed for everything under the sun. World hunger was somehow traced back to my poor leadership. And people left the church and they always blamed me. And my pride took a beating and all my sense of self-worth as a pastor was shaken. But I'll tell you something, at the end of that year, God began doing things in our church that we'd never seen before. And we reached more people, saw more people come to Christ than we'd seen in any time that I'd been as a pastor to that point. And I'll never forget one day just realizing what God had done. And in that moment, I realized I had always been one humble, desperate prayer away from the greatest work of God that He'd ever done in my life. But until I was ready to make those adjustments, I was stuck. I see a lot of Christians today who are stuck where they are. They're stuck as the same kind of Christian they've been for 10, 20 years. They pray the same way, they serve the same way. They haven't moved forward in their walk with God. And oftentimes those people, they're really only one adjustment to God away from the best walk with God they've ever had.
Yeah, our problem is that oftentimes we would prefer to stay where we are because it's what we know. And even if we know we're not what we should be, and even if we don't even like who we are or where we are, oftentimes because it's familiar, we'll choose to just stay that way rather than stepping out into something that is unknown or unfamiliar. And it takes humility to come to that place of realization where I'm not all that I could be. And in order for God to get me there, He might have to do some things in my life and take me through some things that are going to shape me. And that process may be uncomfortable, but if I want to get there, I'm going to have to go through this in order to get there.
And if we never become the servant of God, the person of God that He wants us to be, it doesn't just cost us, it always costs others, because we never did what God wanted to equip us to do. And so our question for you in this session would simply be, what adjustments do you need to make so that you are dead center where God would have you to be today?